It is time for the smoking hot tip of the week. And how about this? A little new blood working into the podcast from Texas Star Grill Shop. That would be DJ Mentzel. And DJ, I know you're at the Woodland store. So a little shout out to the Woodlands because we have a lot of listeners, well, all over the country, but a lot of listeners in the Houston area that are up north. And I wanted to get right into it with you, man. You've been a competitive pitmaster. Obviously, you're one of the experts at Texas Star Grill Shop. This is one that is a little bit, I don't know if polarizing is the right word. I don't know if it's that serious a thing, but it's certainly a conversation that a lot of people have. Let's start with, I know there's different meats, you know, whether it's beef or brisket or whatever, pork, ribs, etc. But spritzing, using a sauce, a lot of people use it at the ends of cooks, or using water pans. Let's start with spritzing. When as a rule, because again, these are sort of general discussions here, but as a rule, when do you spritz? Do you spritz? And what would be the recommendation?
So typically, you really only want to spritz when a part of the brisket's burning. Spritz kind of began when you got these big offset smokers. You're just going to have hot spots. And the way convection works is one point of the brisket, for say, if we're cooking brisket, it's going to take a little bit more brunt of the heat. And so what you would do is you would spritz right there in order to keep it from burning. Because you don't want to burn it, but you also don't want to spritz it a ton. And I think we got somewhere lost where this spritzing has became so popular. And it's probably from whole hog cooking where you're constantly mopping it and basting it and stuff like that. But when you're working really hard, you're cooking for a long time to make a beautiful bark, the last thing you want to do is keep spritzing it before you develop a bark. So typically when you want to spritz it is after you've already developed a bark. And a good way to tell is if you rub your finger on there, seasoning will come off if it's not set. And if no seasoning comes off, it's set. And at that point you can spritz. And people think you're going to get some flavor there. And there's a little bit of truth to that. But mostly it's just to prevent burning. So I would say after you've developed the bark, which would typically be at least 2 to 4 hours. I would say after 4 hours when you start spritzing.
And so you're talking mostly, it sounds like, a whole hog, big, maybe shoulders, and brisket. And is that where you kind of draw the line, or are there other scenarios where you would spritz?
Yeah, you can definitely spritz ribs too, because ribs can be a little bit uneven, and so there could be a smaller bone on one point if you didn't trim it up very much. And I mean, we're most of the time we're just smoking and cooking in the backyard. We're not trying to cut off 3 ribs to make a perfect presentation like you see on the competition scene and such.
Yeah.
And so you're going to want to leave that meat on there, and those smaller bones or smaller pieces of meat will burn or cook faster. And so you'll want to spritz that in order to tame the cooking process, in order for it to be to burn through. And you can always, obviously, we're seeing more and more of these days, instead of so much spritzing, is this like positional aluminum foil.
Yeah.
We'll just protect that small area that's getting a bunch of the brunt of the heat with just some aluminum foil.
Yeah, I've seen Leonard Botello do that over at Truth, and I think he knows what he's doing. I think he knows what he's doing out there. I would follow that lead. And so you mentioned something that I was actually going to ask you about. Is spritzing something of a fad? Like people tend to do it, and they really don't need to?
Yeah, I think I think so. I think for the vast majority of people, they're seeing it done and they're hearing you put in apple cider vinegar, or this person says, let's do apple juice. And so you're thinking it's imparting these flavors and you're helping it and stuff like that. And, you know, anything with some sugar in it, so apple juice and stuff, the sugars will caramelize and it does kind of help with the barks a little bit. And that's a totally different topic. But nonetheless, I think people just see it and without knowing, they'll do that. And so they'll spritz it and they're like, spritzing it every 30 minutes. The whole cook. Well, you do see some spritzing on like pork butts is probably the only thing I really do spritz personally. And that's after about 4 or 5 hours, and I'm just spritzing to keep it moist because I'm trying to get a nice meteor bark on that thing.
Yeah, well, that's awesome stuff, because I am with you. I very sparingly spritz. But what I do, and you may think I'm a complete idiot, is especially with ribs, and my chicken, the last hour or so, and we're transitioning into the using sauces. You mentioned mopping earlier. The last hour or so of my chicken and my ribs, I'll baste it, mop it, whatever term you want to use. And frankly, that's why I came up, 20 whatever years ago with my OG sauce, which is obviously now available right there where you are. Is that something, what are your thoughts on saucing, mopping, etc.?
Yeah, great sauce, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. No, I am of the. There's a couple of rules. There's, with barbecue, there's opinions, and that doesn't necessarily mean one's right, one's wrong. I think with barbecue sauce, it's more just an opinion-based thing. Me personally, I'm in the camp of barbecue sauce, and I'm very similar to you. I like to, when I finish my ribs, it's like the last 15, 30 minutes, I put a coat of ribs or a coat of barbecue sauce on there and let them finish and tack up there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, to me personally, that's that little bit of extra tackiness adds a little bit of extra something on ribs, and so I definitely prefer that. And I love barbecue chicken, but I like mine with the little sauce, the same thing. Now, there's nothing to say there's anything wrong with not use barbecue sauce. You can definitely just do like a standard salt, pepper, and rib, and those are getting more popular these days. People are going to go in more traditional, where no sauce, no nothing, just salt and pepper smoke.
Yeah.
Those are definitely. It's just a different experience.
Now,
but me personally, I love sauce. So.
Yeah, well, good. That's good to hear. A little reassuring for me. Now, there is such a thing as too soon. I've been known to be walking around the neighborhood on a Saturday or Sunday, and I smell that burned sauce smell. Someone is putting it on at the very beginning, and it just, that's a good way. I will say it, ruin a good chicken. A lot of people put sauce on too soon. You got to pick your spots on it, correct?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned earlier, so most sauces are going to have sugars in it. And those sugars will caramelize and add great flavor. But if they're cooking for a long time, they just burn. Those sugars will burn, and you'll kind of get a little bit more of that acrid taste, per se. Yeah. And when you sauce it so early or sauce at the beginning, you're adding so much moisture to the exterior walls of the protein that you're not going to build that bark that we're smoking and cooking. We're trying to build these layers of flavor. It kind of protects the ribs or the chicken from that smoke and that bark. Yeah. So what you'll see it all the time is, people will wrap ribs in, like, let's say barbecue sauce. If they don't cook it enough uncovered before they wrap it in barbecue sauce, they'll pull it out and it'll just look great. It'll get rid of all the seasoning because the seasoning hasn't had time to set yet. So you definitely sauce way too early, and that is probably a common theme, but
yeah. Now, I when we were setting up this to talk on this smoking hot tip of the week, I mentioned water pans. I'm going to bump that to next week when I talk with you, because I think it might tie in more with the smoke and smoke flow, etc. Just because it ties in with that, temperatures of different types of pits. We're going to talk about that next week. But you got me thinking on to kind of put a bow on this, whether you're spritzing or saucing. I've seen beer. I've used beer occasionally. Depends on the cut, depends on the mood. Where I call it a blessing. I just put a slight little bit of beer on each side of the brisket for the last few hours. And for some reason, I don't know if it's the yeast or what, you're the expert. I've had some good experiences with that, or is that a no-go?
You're not really going to notice anything necessarily from beer. I think there's like an old random, just like barbecue joke where it'd be like a hydrated cook leads to a hydrated piece of meat. and typically cook's going to be drinking beer, and it definitely, when I was growing up and maybe wasn't so experienced cooking on charcoal and you start running a fire a little bit high, I think it probably started very similar to how I would pour like a little beer on the charcoal, calm down the fire and stuff like that. And I would also always thin my barbecue sauce with a little beer, and whether it adds much or anything, no. Does it hurt anything? No. You're not going to worry about any alcohol. It's all going to burn off anyway, and with these degrees of temperatures anyway.
Yeah.
But
And by
it's
the way, go ahead.
no, it's fun. You know, I like beer can chicken. I love. You know,
Yeah.
and people have done studies that say like the moisture from that doesn't actually do anything, and I mean I don't believe that. But
Yeah.
I've seen studies saying it doesn't do anything.
Hmm.
But I've definitely cooked plenty of beer can chickens and noticed it doing something. So
That's exactly what I was going to ask you about. You read my mind because I've done some beer can chicken and it does seem to have even just a flavor. I don't know what it is, but it does work. But man, you don't know how much we appreciate this. Our listeners are always looking forward to the smoking hot tips. We're going to hit you again next week with another smoking hot tip, and I gave the teaser already. It's going to be about smoke flow temperatures, different type of kettle type and smaller pits, because that's always a problem for backyard cooks, how to do that. And that's when I'll add the water pan. But for now, I really appreciate it, man. This has been the smoking hot tip of the week. That's DJ Mentzel from Texas Star Grill Shop. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Don't forget to join us every week. We've had some fantastic guests and we've had some fantastic tips like this. Until then, smoke it up. We will talk to you next time. All right, I forgot to tell you about that. I was going to do the the outro
sure,
at
that's
the
fine.
end of it.
I used to dabble in content creation, so I'm familiar with this.
Okay, I'm sure you did. By the way, where did you compete competitively yourself?
Yeah. Growing up with some buddies, we had the competition team and stuff like that. So,
well, good. Are you good? Are you good to do the next one right now?
Yeah, we can do the next one.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm good at that right now.
I'll get right into it and I'll edit them out. All right, here we go. This is the smoking hot tip of the week, and we are joined again this week by the very knowledgeable. I think you guys picked up on that last week. DJ Mentzel from Texas Star Grill Shop, and this is going to be a good one because we've talked with some of the preeminent barbecue pit masters from around the world on this podcast, but they don't always, or it's been a long time since they've cooked with a kettle type pit, like a Weber, or maybe even something like a Big Green Egg. Or the barrel, like the barrel pits, like we all grew up on. I'm sure you've got some experience with barrel pits, DJ. But we're talking about the keeping the temperature. Everybody knows that if they've listened to this podcast, whether it's a stick burner or otherwise, and smoke flow. That's important. Getting that white smoke, keeping the temperature right. Man, it's a whole different world when you're on a barrel or a kettle type pit. What are your go-to? It's a very broad based question, but what are your please do this, type points for our listeners?
My biggest advice on these smaller charcoal grills and even like the Walmart specials and stuff like that, anything, right? As long as you're barbecuing, I'm happy with you. But my biggest advice is start with a small fire. You can always crank it up. You just add a little bit more oxygen. But if you start too high, you got to try to back it down. Now you got too big of a coal bed. And that's where it leads to a lot of like instability in these smaller cookers and a lot of fluctuation in temperatures because you're trying to combat, you're killing all the oxygen flow, then you drop temperature, so you open it back up and you see a lot of swings. Whereas if you just take a little bit of time there, give yourself 30, 45 minutes, maybe even an hour of temperature control after you start the fire, just start with a small bed of coal and work your way up. I'm a big fan of the snake method, specifically on kettles for low and slow, at least.
Boy, you said a mouthful there. You absolutely. I can't tell you how many times early on in doing this where I set a fire and it's way too hot, and I'm not going to lie. I've done this back in the day. I'm like, well, I'll put it on now and it'll cook. It'll cool off over the course of time. But no, it gets real hot real fast, and so start small. What are some other things that you want people to know about these types of cooks?
Well, typically, you definitely want to leave yourself space in between, and it really can be constricting with these smaller cookers, but you definitely want to be offset as much as possible from the heat. And let's say you're doing like a larger protein, like a brisket on a Weber kettle and stuff like that. What you're going to want to do is rotate that 180 degrees and change the side that's closest to the fire. I would say pretty pretty regularly, every hour or so. That way, it's not overcooking one side too much, because at the end of the day, you are just going to be closer on that side.
And where do you stand on smoke flow for those? Because it can be, actually, I've found you can control it pretty well because it's only going one place and you have to have an exit. But what are your thoughts on that?
No, they're pretty good, especially if you're using the snake method and you have a small bed of coals, like I mentioned earlier. You're going to know exactly, you're going to have the fire source isolated, and you put that vent exact opposite end on the top side. That way you're doing a good, how you would envision an offset where it starts on the left, it goes up, it rotates to the right, and goes out the stack. You have those vents on the side of those kettle lids. As long as your kettle or your coals on the opposite side, that's going to be plenty airflow for you, as long as you're not too wide open, whether it be the top or the bottom.
Now, one more thing, and that I forgot to mention. You mentioned the coals, but you can be very judicious, if you will, with the wood you're using to get that smoke flavor. Like I think charcoal briquettes are very underrated in these types of cooks. And then just put on a small piece or a piece of oak or whatever your wood is of choice. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, no, I think briquettes are a bit underrated, and you can get some high quality briquettes. The reason we love lump coal is because briquettes for a long time were just very badly made, and they had so many chemicals and stuff like that. But nowadays you can get some really high quality, all natural briquettes, and briquettes are great in them smaller cookers because they're a lot more uniform shape, and it's a lot easier to control those temperatures. Whereas on a lump charcoal, you're going to have different varying sizes of pieces of wood, and that's just going to cause more instability in your temperature. So I'm a huge fan of briquettes on these smaller Webers, and me personally, I have a PK grill, and I love briquettes.
I've done ribs on my PK, and they've been fantastic. I've got that's what I keep down in Aransas Pass. So I didn't even mention PK, but that's even smaller. Now, how about this before we let you go here, and that is the water pan. It probably is we're talking about a little bigger pit, but I think it falls into this category, as I mentioned last time. What is your advice, recommendation with water pans?
I am a fan of water pans, and you can definitely use water pans in Weber kettles. If you've got the snake method off to the side, or if you're using something like an S&S, which is like a half moon charcoal grate, you can. They sometimes come with the little water tray thing in there. You can put a water pan underneath the brisket. What that's really going to do is add moisture into the air. And if you think about it, gas grills, they're typically no flavor there, and that's because it's a dry air environment. It really zaps the moisture out of there. Gas does, just by a byproduct. And so you adding water into a cooking chamber, whether it be an offset or a kettle style grill, you're just really adding moisture to the air, which is just typically going to lead to a more tender, juicier piece of meat, right?
Yeah, and we didn't even mention that. Like people do that with gas grills, and you have a lot of them there at Texas Star Grill Shop. It's not a deal breaker, is it? If you have one of those?
No, not at all. None at all. You can smoke and cook on anything. There's a lot of ingenuity. I think the whole barbecue world just evolved originally from ingenuity, trying to figure out how to make some added flavor, take tough cuts of meat, add some smoke flavor and some time, and you do it. Not everybody's going to have the big, huge Franklin smokers, or maybe not even the Weber kettles. You just got a gas grill. You can make things happen. I've definitely seen ribs get made on gas grills with some smoke chips and stuff like that. It's really just about adding smoke to meat, really. But what would definitely benefit in certain vehicles is adding moisture there.
Yeah. Man, this has been fantastic. That's DJ Mentzel. Go see him if you're out in the Woodlands area, north part of Houston. You can get this expertise live and in person. And so thanks to you, DJ. Thanks to Sonny Moody for joining us in today's podcast. That was very good stuff. And, of course, thanks to you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. I would recommend Podbean because that's where we host it, but you can subscribe anywhere you get your podcast, whether it's iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere else. You guys have a fantastic weekend. have, hey man, Labor Day is coming down the pike. So don't forget to see our guys if you're in the mood to get a new grill or pit or whatever. Until then, you guys smoke it up, and we will talk to you next time. Perfect, dude.
Perfect, man.
That's awesome. I really appreciate it. I'm going to come see you, man.
Yeah,
just maybe do one of these in person on a weekend or something. But
Yeah.
I'm glad we knocked this out. We got to the guy from Badia Spices joining us tomorrow, so that'll be your first one. And then Sunny Moody, who's been on all the cooking shows and Bobby Flay and all that, she'll be joining us next week.
Yeah.
So I sure appreciate it. I'll come see you soon.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, I appreciate it too. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks a lot. All right, appreciate it. Bye bye.
Thank you.